Welcome to this Empire Army showcase. Last year I got smitten by a bad case of chronic miniature painting fever. One result of that is this small Empire Army standing before you. Most of it consists of relatively old school metal minis, which in my opinion is the best a miniature can be. Now, I'm not very much into the official Warhammer lore. No army book was consulted in the picking of color schemes or what models to include. I prefer my army to be as unique to me as is possible. That said, I still want an element of lore and storytelling, so I've decided that my army originates from somewhere in 𝕻𝖊𝖙𝖎𝖙. This places them in the proximity of Kislev, which can explain the presence of a certain character we'll have a look at later in the video. That's the preamble out of the way, and it's time we take a closer look at some miniatures, starting with the core units. And that's all the core units. I fear my self-imposed rule of using as many metal minis as I can has made it economically unfeasible to amass any regular infantry yet. In its current state, the army isn't a playable Warhammer army under any rules as yet conceived by man, without a heavy dose of homebrewing at least. Luckily other games exist, but I doubt this army will ever see much combat in any game, regardless. One of the first minis I painted was this grey wizard from 1992. I took quite a bit of inspiration from the official paint job on this one. My favorite detail is the stars on the horse's barding. They are hardly visible unless you get up close. For the feathers ornamenting his staff and sword, I borrowed the design of the feather of Super Mario fame. I then used this design on almost every feather in the army, which I think serves nicely to tie this motley crew together. I pictured a wizard guiding the unit of greatswords, spurring them into battle. Speaking of them, onto the greatswords. With the unit filler included, they are a respectable 15 models strong. The variety in poses here is alright, as long as you keep any twins separated when they all stand in formation. I favor the ones with wide poses and bearded faces, so they ended up with the most striking color schemes. This is the command group. The musician is nice, but ridiculously front heavy. The champion clearly lacks a big hat with a feather, something I need to rectify someday. As you can tell, these guys are pretty big fans of Jane Fonda in the movie Barbarella. This was my first attempt at freehanding a banner, and I'm really pleased with the outcome. The unit also has an alternative champion. This model by 𝕻𝖊𝖙𝖎𝖙 Miniatures. I like it a lot, but he has problems fitting in the tight ranks. This is the problem with smaller base sizes, I suppose, but it's worth it for the superior aesthetics. Over here we have a unit of Imperial Ogres. The little guy with the cannon in the middle is a Games Workshop sculpt, and he is being flanked by two models from 𝕻𝖊𝖙𝖎𝖙 Miniatures, carrying great weapons. The middle ogre might look a bit off in scale at first glance, but if you look at the head and feet of all three models, they seem to match decently well in size. My explanation is that he is simply an ogre of shorter stature, which is also why he favors a ranged weapon, as in the past he never fared too well in hand-to-hand combat with the larger members of his kin. On the opposite end of the field we find the only plastic models in the army, the three 𝕻𝖙𝖎𝖙 Knights. They found their way to my army through a local toy shop, who stock a small shelf of Warhammer stuff, something I'd like to support and encourage in some small way at least. As you may have noticed, I've replaced the heads of the gryphs. These are sculpted from polymer clay. A crow, a crane and a seagull, three of my top 5 favorite birds. If you're a fan of Mobile Suit Gundam, you can see where I got the inspiration for the color schemes of this unit. The champion is of course based on 𝕻𝖊𝖙𝖎𝖙𝖊, the standard bearer on the Zaku 2, and the musician on Rambaral and his goof. At the front of the army we have two captains of the Empire. One you may be familiar with, the infamous, ugly Bretonnian Lord. I don't agree with that label. I think this is a great model. Especially so once he left Bretonnia for the Empire, putting on an imperial feathered hat, which I nicked from another model. I also carved away the pre-sculpted heraldry of his shield. I always prefer blank shields, banners, barding and capes. This is prime real estate for the painter to express themselves. I replaced it with the heraldic weapon of a local town. I'm really happy with how this model turned out. The other captain is the only fully resin model in the army, but I wanted to include her as this showcase has been a bit of a sausage fest so far. This model is a Brennan Moore Imperial Captain from Black Scorpion. The only modification I have done is removing a millimeter or two of height from the middle of her boots. She is printed at 32mm scale and still towers over the regular greatsword infantry. But when she's standing on her own on a separate base, I don't think the size difference is very noticeable or too much of an issue. My favorite aspect of her paint job is the patterned cloak. My General of the Empire is one of Games Workshop's named characters, 𝕻𝖊𝖙𝖎𝖙. I don't like official Warhammer characters to be part of my army, so in my lore, this model is a distant relative of the Reichsmarshal, who just happens to sport an equally impressive moustache and the same incredible helmet. This is probably my favorite model of the whole army. I was really pleased with the freehanding on the barding. The text is done with a fineliner, which I find much easier to use for this purpose, as opposed to a tiny brush. Behind the general is probably the most unique model of the army, Ellinor the Kislevite atop her winged moose, Alexander. The moose is from alternative armies. The model is called the Canadian Paladin or some such. The wings and body are cast resin, but the legs, head and antlers are metal, so it still has some nice heft to it. I swapped out the original rider for a sculpt of Tsarina Katarin, the Ice Queen of Kislev. As with the general, in my army this sculpt fills another role, as a less regal Kislevite witch. You can see she is lacking the crown of the original sculpt. This was already missing when I acquired the model, along with half her face. I repaired the damage with green stuff. She looks alright post-painting, but before that she bore a striking resemblance to Arnold Schwarzenegger. I modeled her wardrobe after a local folk costume, which I think fit the sculpt rather well. Last but not least, we have an Elector count on a majestic Imperial Griffin. This beast has also had its head swapped for another of my favorite birds, the Eurasian eagle owl. This was done with green stuff, with which I'm not very proficient, so it's lacking any finer details, but as with the witch, the paint job has served well to hide the flaws of the sculpting. Note the orange feathers of the griffin. Perhaps it or its relative is the provider of all the feathers ornamenting the members of the army as a symbol of unity. The Eurasian eagle owl is the official bird of the province of Sweden in which I live, and the heraldry of this province, Dalarna, is also emblazoned on the shield of the Elector count. In fact, different local coats of arms can be seen on several of the models in this army. This is not due to any severe local patriotism on my part. It's intended to be a feature that's recognizable by the common man, someone that isn't a big fat nerd like you and I. For the rider I attempted a non-metallic gold armor. Despite having practiced on every sword in the army, as well as on 2D drawings, non-metallic metal painting is still a coin toss every time for whether I succeed in achieving a convincing effect or not. This wasn't a complete failure, but there is definitely room for improvement. I'm happy with this face. He doesn't look terrified, but neither does he seem too confident. He looks about as comfortable as one could hope to be in his position atop a murderous apex predator. Who he hopes to strike with his sword from atop his mount, I do not know, but hey, it looks cool. That's all I had to show you. I can finally strike completing an army from my bucket list, a point that has been there since I was gifted the Battle for Skullpass box for Christmas many years ago and never completed painting it. As I'm recording this, I have even more models incoming, and if I don't recover from the painting fever anytime soon, I look forward to post an update on the state of the army next year. Until then, cheers.